we get started, I'll allow people to trickle in, but as you can see, our first slide here is Zoom expectations. So I just want to make sure everyone is familiar with the webinar's features and how they're offered on Zoom. So for the purpose of this session, I've turned off your camera and microphone features, so you won't need to worry about those for today. So during this session, I'll be asking you to participate from time to time. I encourage you to provide your thoughts and opinions through the chat feature. So to do that, click on the chat icon at the bottom of your screen. So during the Q&A at the end of this session, I'll ask you to submit your questions using the Q&A feature or button. So if you have questions that come up at any time during this presentation, feel free to submit them using the Q&A feature, and I'll be sure to address them at the end of this session. Again, to do that, just click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. All right, so it is 12 on the dot, so let us get started. All right, so first things first, we just have to cover our bases. So before we move into the presentation itself, I just want to inform everyone as a disclaimer that we are not financial advisors. So the content in this training is going to be for educational purposes only. So this material does not take into account your particular financial objectives, situation, or needs, and it's not intended as recommendations appropriate for you, right? So in order to make the best financial decision that suits your needs, you should conduct your own research and seek the advice of a licensed financial advisor if necessary. With that in mind, let us continue on. All righty, so again, welcome to Financial Literacy Week provided by or powered by UMortgage. So this week we'll have a number of sessions discussing various topics regarding financial literacy, all available to you for free. So topics will range from investing, student loans, credit, cryptocurrency, and even mortgages. So we really, truly want to make this a free, accessible resource to everyone, and we hope you can join us throughout the week. So today, we will firstly be covering the basics of financial health. So again, just a disclaimer, we are not providing financial advice in this course or throughout the week. We're simply going to be providing you with the knowledge and information so that you can begin to make choices on your own. Something to keep in mind that we are all going to be, right, we're all in different financial situations, and what is available to you may not be available to others. There's a lot of different factors, but regardless, there's more than likely going to be information today and throughout the week that will benefit everyone. So let's dive into the basics of financial health. All right, so before we get into the basics, here's a question for you prompted on the screen. So what was the median income for workers in America in 2020? So by median income, I mean, what is the middle of the road income where half of the workers earned below this value and then half of the workers earned above the value? So in the chat, please give us a guess. Let's see what we got. So you can access, again, the chat by clicking on the text bubble icon and then typing in there. So again, what do you think the median, so middle of the road income is in America in 2020? In general, this is not by region or city, just the broader spectrum, right? So what do you think that's going to be? So I'll give you a few seconds here to throw your answers in the chat or guesses in the chat, and we'll see what we get. So yeah, as you send in your answers, take a look at what others are saying. So your answer is more than likely influenced by your background, or so how you grew up and where you grew up. They're both going to have influences on your general financial health and, pre-knowledge, basically. So much of what we'll be discussing today will be taking a broad look at financial health, breaking it down into more digestible chunks so you can get a solid foundation of your finances. This is aimed at all audiences. So whether you're trying to get a head start in high school, or if you're just trying to get ahead in your personal financial situation in general, the background is irrelevant because the information is important nonetheless. That said, there is definitely going to be some work that you'll have to put in on your end to get the most out of this information. So keep that in mind. And at the end of this course, you'll be given a few takeaways that will help you keep up with your finances and then maintain that overall financial health that we're looking for. Now, back to business. So what is the average salary in America in 2020? And as we can see here, that number on the screen. So as some of you may recall, I know I saw this when it came to be. There was a tweet that made news about students from the Wharton School of Business here in Philadelphia, so at the University of Penn, who were asked a similar question. And it's a great question to ask. So to answer this question, we're going to look at the data from the US Census, the median income for an individual worker in America during 2020. And the number is, as we see on the screen, $41,535 per year. So that means that half of the US workers earn less than this amount, and then half earned more. So this is a much better way of looking at the general income, because if we looked at the average salary of workers in 2020, it would be heavily influenced by those who are billionaires, and it would skew our data. So with a median income, we can see what the middle ground is, which is kidding. So then at 41,535 a year, let's put that into a little bit more of a different perspective. So with that number as your yearly salary, that means you'll be making gross about $19.96 per hour, assuming that you worked a standard 40-hour work week, which equates to about $3,461 per month and about $1,597 per paycheck, again, before taxes. And as a reminder that your gross income is everything that you make before taxes. Your net is your net income is what you would make after taxes and deductions. So that's what you're ultimately going to be taking home at the end of the day. So does that number surprise you? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. The reality is that many of us are above and below that average salary. And we're all working from different financial situations and scenarios. So keep these numbers in mind as we dig deeper into the basics of financial health. All right, so let's talk about our goals for today. So in our session today, we'll be looking at a couple different topics. So first, we're going to discuss 5 key concepts of personal money management in building wealth. We will review basic money management habits in various scenarios dealing with each concept, and we will prepare 3 goals to better manage our finances. So throughout our presentation, we may ask you to participate through the chat feature again. And we also encourage you to take notes if you'd like, as we're going to be diving into a ton of information overall. And at the end, we'll have some time to answer any questions that you're going to have, that you may have, which you can also leave in the chat feature as well. So all that being said, let's dive into our 5 key concepts. All right, so when discussing financial health, these are going to be our 5 major concepts to consider. More importantly, we must consider the relationship between each concept. The 5 key concepts to remember are going to be budgeting, saving, spending, investments, and credit. All of these concepts are related in one way or another, and we'll explain how here. So let's start with our first, budget. So budgets or budgeting is going to be the first topic we're going to discuss. Many people think that a budget means you're going to reduce spending. Well, it's not necessarily the case. That choice is going to be totally up to you. Budgeting as a word has a few different meanings, but we can break it down piece by piece. So a budget plan boils down to an estimated plan for an amount of money and where it goes. For example, my budget for lunch this week would be, or would look at, or where I'm buying lunch. So where and when. So that could be $20 to fast food, $6 to the cafeteria, $40 to local food trucks. If you're renting a house or an apartment, maybe your cost of living budget is based around having $750 towards rent every month and an additional $150 towards utilities. For groceries, $15 for snacks, $20 for produce, $20 for meat. We get the idea, right? So regardless of the expense, you can make a budget plan for that expense. You can also estimate a budget plan for upcoming purchases or other variable expenses that could occur. So for instance, right, maybe you start school in a month and you'll need materials. So make an estimated budget, let's say $100, you set aside $100 and you find out what materials you'll need. You have your budget to work with. So say hello to that nice Pilot G2 pen, right? As you plan a budget for upcoming expenses, they may be higher, they may be lower than your planned budget, which brings us to the other meaning of a budget. So does this sound familiar? Hello, Best Buy employee. I am looking to buy a new laptop or tablet for school. Fantastic, young student. Tell me, what is your budget? Well, what is your budget? So your budget in this case is how much you're willing to spend for a potential purchase. So let's say you have $500 to spend on a laptop. You then have a $500 budget. So sometimes you might be willing to splurge and go over budget to buy something that resonates with you specifically. Just be aware that when you do this, you will be pulling money from other areas of your budget. Because you paid an extra $50 for your laptop, you may need to spend $50 less on food, maybe end a subscription to a streaming service, hold off on that new watch that you wanted. You get the idea. When you go over budget, you have to make adjustments to the rest of your budget elsewhere. That's key. So when you stay under budget, you end up with some extra money left over from what you intended on spending with. So this is great because now you can allocate the leftover funds in any way that you choose, really. You can push it towards savings, you can use it to buy accessories or take yourself out to dinner. Strive to be under budget so that you can have extra, we'll call it petty cash, right? So then we're looking for a laptop and we realize my budget is only $500. So Mr. Best Buy tells you that they've got a really nice laptop with a cool design and gaming specs at $575, let's say. So do you go over budget, or do you get the simple laptop that you take notes with and watch videos on, and that only costs you $350? And then you would then use the rest of the money left over towards, let's say, a nice pair of headphones. That would be pretty cool, right? So you have options. Always need options. So these are the best decisions, or these are the decisions that you're going to have to make as you build your budget. Regardless of your choice, your budget still gives you a good idea on what is going to come out of your bank account at the end of the day. Just having that awareness is key. So now I've said it once and I'm going to say it again, budgets are going to be extremely important. They allow us to see where all of our money is going and how we can change it if necessary. So many times people don't realize that they've been paying for something for months, maybe even years, until they create their budget and analyze their finances. So take a look at your bank or credit card statements and check on what you've purchased in the last month or two. Oftentimes, credit cards will allow you to dispute purchases for up to 3 months old, if they aren't accurate, let's say. So even when you've been planning for your budget, sometimes you really don't realize just how much you're actually spending. So who knows, you may be paying $20 a month for a streaming service that you don't even use, or you forgot to cancel the free trial for that workout program that you started in January. So this is particularly important if you have children, as there are often sometimes mystery purchases on your bank statement that you're not even aware of. So just be cognizant of that as well. All right, so to create a budget plan, we simply have to take a look at our net income, or again, how much you're making, or the total of expenses or on what you've been paying for it, and then choose a time frame. So your net income, again, is going to be the money you actually take home after deductions and taxes. So keep that in mind. So let's say we're looking at our general budget for a single month. So write down all of your major expenses, keeping track of what kind of things you're actually buying, you're actually purchasing. So think in broad categories. So food, transportation, rent. So if you have any special purchases like a present for your dad, or so let's say parking tickets, put that in the variable or miscellaneous category. The variable category is a great thing to have. So use this for things that you often pay for, so it's consistent, but they may present different values each time, or different prices each time. So presents, parking fees, tickets, happy hours, these are all going to be considered variable expenses. And that's it. So you made a budget for a month here. So this budget here would be a little loose. So we've probably rounded up some cents and took a real guess as to how much we spent at that Mexican restaurant. But we can look at our expenses and see if there's anything we want to change for the future. Maybe we're spending more on dining out than we thought, or maybe it's time to lay off the concerts. Either way, looking at our total expenses that we've gone over budget on is key. So for the next month, we'll really need to cut back on expenses and adjust so we don't fall into debt. And that is the most valuable part about knowing our budget. So we can adjust how much we need to and make a plan for it in the future. So looking ahead, there are going to be a number of budgeting systems, such as the 50-30-20 method or the envelope method. These methods generally try to split your income into particular categories like needs and wants and debts. So there's definitely more nuance to this than looking at these budgeting methods, but there are going to be a ton of different methods out there. So some are rather more strict, so they'll actually follow every penny. Some are a bit loose and rely on your ability to self-manage. So do some research for a budgeting method that works best for you. If you'd like a head start, tune in today at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and there is a specific course on budgeting itself. So definitely tune in for that. So the key here is to have an understanding of where your money is going. That's the point, right? So we all have different spending habits, and understanding those habits lets us shift for when we need to adjust. And that is budgeting in a nutshell, right? So the first concept is done. So do understand through that, or though that budgeting is extremely important, is influenced by many factors. As you review your budget, you'll also be looking at another key concept in your financial health, which is spending, which is our next topic. So spending is our catch-all phrase for anything that you purchase. So you can also think of it as a final destination for your money. Even when you're putting money aside for later, you're simply spending money on your savings, which we'll talk about here shortly. All right, so understanding the final resting place of your money and finances is an incredible, powerful piece of knowledge. Often, after not checking your bank or your credit card statement or your budget, you may find yourself, again, paying for things you never thought about in the first place, like streaming services. That's one of the biggest ones in all, right? Or maybe the food service that you tried last winter, and then that turned into a subscription, or you never realized the increase in the price from one of your favorite streaming services. These things happen all the time across the board. And that is all money that could service or better service you, or in your put more money in your pocket ultimately, or you can spend it elsewhere. Another thing to note is that understanding your spending habits can let you adjust for the future. So are you hoping to pick out a ring for your partner soon, or perhaps you're saving more money for a down payment on a car for a home, or a car or home? Analyze your spending habits and then adjust them accordingly to help you save and budget for those future endeavors, right? We all have these things in the future that we ultimately want to pay for. So it's also important to remember that your spending habits, especially when using credit cards, will heavily influence your credit. We'll discuss this later on, but keep this in mind, and keep in mind that how you spend and what you owe are going to be important factors here. All right, so we've talked a lot about spending and adjusting our spending. But what are we supposed to do? Spend less, spend more, don't spend at all? The correct answer is really all three. So what we really want to do is carefully analyze our spending and income and be aware of what we're doing with our money. The easiest way to do this is to create a budget. But if you don't have the time or the need, or need a quick glimpse, looking at your most recent bank statements will work. So if you actually operate with cash, which a lot of people do still, then writing down your most common purchases will be the quickest glimpse that you need. So once you've got a view of all of your spending, take note of the types of purchases that you're making, and then we'll generally split them up into different categories. So let's take a look at these categories. So in terms of the most common categories, think of housing and rent, food and utilities, entertainment or recreation, and personal. Of course, we can break these down even further to get into the nitty-gritty details of your spending. So some of the common categories to consider are going to be your subscriptions and memberships, so your streaming services, your meal services, magazines, things like that. Food, so breaking your food spending into subcategories like groceries, dining in, taking out, things like that. Maybe medical expenses or prescriptions, including any kind of potential health insurance costs, co-pays, and deductibles that could potentially be in your future. Transportation, like ride sharing, bike sharing, gas, general public transportation, things like that. Clothing and accessories, miscellaneous and variables. So think again, like parking tickets, the common thing here in Philadelphia at least, birthdays, holidays, pets. So these are kind of how we're really looking at breaking these categories down. So regardless, there are going to be tons of categories and ways you can break down your spending. So the key here is that once you've figured out what you're spending on, we can analyze what we need and then what we want to spend. So figuring out your needs versus your wants is key to managing your spending and then analyzing your budget. A need will be anything that you need in order to live safely and comfortably. So think housing, food, utilities, insurance, clothing. These are going to be some real life, real grown-up purchases, right? And then wants are exactly what you think, things that you want to buy, but don't really need to be safe and comfortable. So new name brand clothing, the brand new smartphone that just came out, a circular saw for your do-it-yourself coffee table that you have yet to start. Yes, it would be nice to have these things, but we don't need them in order to live and then live comfortably, right? So this is heavily going to differ from person to person, and it should be realistic. So let's say you're on year 15 of those black checkered Vans that you got in Warped Tour 2001, and your foot is fully broken through the shoe. You probably need a new shoe. You may want the Adidas Harden Volume 6s with a nice colorway, but the need is still a shoe. So go order some canvas shoes, the easy peasy shoes. It's also that simple. It's also not always that simple, right? It's important to ask yourself, what is truly a need? So many of us have hobbies or activities that bring happiness to us and help with our mental health. Maybe you're collecting vinyl, you garden, or you play in a local sports league. These expenses definitely add up, but it's up to you to decide if you can splurge on these hobbies and these activities. So if you can't right now, then that could be something to begin to save for. So once you've had a good look of your different categories, adjust how you need to. Just make sure you know where your money is going and adjust accordingly, right? So budgeting and spending go hand in hand. So it's good to keep these in mind and keep these in mind together. So earlier, while discussing these concepts, we mentioned another one, saving. So while it may sound self-explanatory, there are actually a few things to consider when we talk about saving. We aren't simply talking about a savings account, rather taking a moment to consider what it is that you're saving for and how you plan on doing that. So let's take a look. So saving refers to setting money aside to be used at a later time. Saving is extremely important, right? And it should be a priority when establishing your financial health. While this sounds rather simple, putting money aside or putting a little bit of cash aside can actually be difficult for some and take time to get to a point where you can actually save regularly. Any unexpected income can be a great addition to your savings. So because it is extra money you didn't plan on having in the first place. So things like bonuses, cash tips, birthday money, tax refunds. Any income that surprised you is great income to throw into your savings. There are going to be a few different ways to go about saving, mostly as different forms of saving funds. So a saving fund offers a ton of support and ease of mind. So it also can help you plan for future purchases so that you don't accidentally spend more than you can afford and then go into debt subsequently. So your savings funds really do a lot of work behind the scenes. So if you have a substantial savings fund, you will be able to manage unexpected expenses and then unexpected life events, right? So an emergency fund is going to be a great way to help you establish this foundation. Emergency funds should be anywhere from 3 to 6 months of your monthly living costs. So basically, if you were to lose your job and any income right now in this moment, you'd want to have enough money to at least get you through the next 3 months. If you take a look at this example, our total monthly expenses are $1,550. So your recommended emergency fund would then need to be $4,650. So a broader, more common goal would be to save 10% of your pre-tax income each year. So if you make $42,000 a year, do your best to save at least $4,200 every year. So it sounds a bit tough, but the idea is that you're saving about 10% of each of your paychecks. For example, let's say you take home $842 each paycheck. We'll set about 10% aside into your savings. So that would be about $85 every paycheck. So those small bits compound, into much larger amounts in the long term, which is what we're kind of gearing towards. On a more somber note, if you've ever experienced any unexpected hardships like loss of job or any kind of significant medical expense from an accident, you may have been thankful or wished for a savings account to help you out with those situations. On the other hand, a savings account may be the reason you were approved for your next apartment, or why you were able to make it through that sweltering summer when your AC decided to quit. So you had to pay for an HVAC repair and bought a few window units just to make do. So keep those in mind. Anything can happen. So, matter of fact, more than half of households struggle to make ends meet after experiencing some type of financial shock. Even worse, 71% of households face difficulty saving due to unforeseen expenses. These are the reasons why it is important to save. So then, how can we do this? Well, there are going to be several options, but in general, you can either create a savings account of some form or simply set aside your cash in a safe place, like a safe. As a reminder, we're talking about these concepts in a very broad manner, so I won't recommend you one product over another. For your knowledge, however, here are going to be a few different types of accounts specifically utilized for saving money. Most commonly, you'll see traditional savings accounts from local banks. These are going to be your pretty much, you're going to find these anywhere, right? So there are going to be also high yield savings accounts, which are generally through online banks and won't have your standard brick and mortar location. So take note that these high yield savings accounts typically require a higher balance. So they may not be for everyone starting out, at least, right? A few other possibilities include money market accounts, certificate of deposits, cash management accounts, and more specifically or more specialty savings accounts like an IRA or an individual retirement account. A few options, all with many different pros and cons. One type of account may be better than others, so I recommend doing a little bit of research on each. When using a savings account, you should know that there are usually conditions for withdrawing money, whether it is a certain amount of withdrawals per month or the expectation that you will not withdraw the money for a certain amount of years. It is vital that you research a savings account on the conditions before opening any account in general. Also, some of the accounts will have minimums on how much is needed to open an account. So, that may also influence your choice of savings method as well. Regardless, do your best to save when you can. Ultimately, saving money is going to be a positive thing all in all, right? So all of our situations are vastly different. So you will have to figure out what option works best for you ultimately. When looking at retirement, most financial planners would say save 1 time your salary by the time you're 30 and then 3 times by the time you're 40. To be honest, with our current financial climate, this is a rather aggressive goal and can be difficult for anyone who gets a later start. A more common goal would be, again, to save at least 10% of your income each year, as we've mentioned before. So if you make $36,000 every year, do your best to save at least $3,600 a year, or again, 10% of each of your paychecks. So let's look at an even bigger example here. So here's an example for you at 23 years old. So you land a job with a $32,000 a year salary right out of college. With a few years of saving and a little help from mom and dad, you were able to buy your first car and then put $10,000 into a savings account. So things are great until you have a rough car accident that leaves you with a beat up car and then some medical expenses. You did dip into your savings to cover the cost and the repair, or you finance another car. Moving forward, you get a higher salary job and then you keep saving, you meet someone great, and unexpectedly have a child, little Robbie. That pushes up the proposal that you were planning, and right after you get married, you decide to buy a house. Not exactly the order you planned, but you were able to increase your savings, though barely. Your partner also decides that it will be best if you combined your savings together. They did rather well for themselves, and now you have about $80,000 in savings as a household, which is good. Looking ahead, your child turns out to be pretty adventurous and gets injured quite often through gymnastics, skateboarding, and a freak dog sitting accident. Lots of medical bills just to find out your second baby is on the way. Perfect surprise for your Disney World trip next week. you had to take a bit more from your savings than you had originally thought. Unfortunately, there are a number of deaths in the family, natural and unexpected. Funeral expenses eat away at your savings as you work through your grief as well. Unfortunate, but very real life circumstances, right? Your second child is now ready for T-ball, so you decide to purchase a second vehicle, an SUV, to make transportation easier for everyone. You buy domestic, and car repairs are going to be a glutton for cash always, especially after little Robbie got into a couple fender benders driving around town. Teenage drivers, you got to watch out. Before you know it, Robbie is going off to college, out of state, which is $34,000 a year at that. Eventually, both kids make it through college and are out on their own. You and your spouse settle back in and work hard to increase your savings. And now that the kids are gone. So you live below your means and you make it work. And by 2058, you're 58 years old with $35K in general savings. So congratulations, you're making it all work, all in all, through all those hardships. There are going to be a lot of tough moments and a lot of rough bumps in life, down the line. But your savings might be the thing that really keeps you afloat in the end. So start saving as soon as possible so you can save yourself for any kind of, unforeseen situations that you'll, potentially come about in the future. All right. Next is investing. So, and speaking of, this is essentially saving for later. So that brings us to our fourth concept, which is investing. So investing is all about the long game. So consider it another form of saving, but with more emphasis on money that isn't used until much later on. The big difference between investing and saving is that when investing the money you set aside, this money should grow on its own. So hopefully the more money you put in originally compounds and grows into a larger amount later on. While some savings accounts do accrue interest and grow over time, an investment will grow at a much higher rate, hopefully. So this does come, again, with its own risks, but investing your money means you can come out with a much larger return than what you started with, or a lot less, depending on how you go about it. Not only that, but investing does take time. So, with a volatile stock market that we see now, you can get in and get out with a big profit, as you may recall from the most recent GameStop short squeeze, but that does not happen often. And even when it does require some planning anyway. So regardless, investing is a great way to generate long-term growth. So in a way, it puts your money to work for you, which is key. Do realize that, this is not for everyone, depending on your financial situation. It is recommended, that you ensure that you have emergency funds established first before, you start investing, just in case of, again, any kind of unexpected life event. Still, it is important to know your options, right? That's why we're talking about this in the first place. So here are going to be a few different options that might be familiar to you. So stocks are one of the most popular and risky forms of investments. Put simply, you invest a chunk of money into a specific company, let's say Apple, and depending on factors that you have no control over, like how well the company does, you could make or lose money. So a high risk, high reward kind of concept. And then there's bonds. So bonds are similar to stocks. A bond is a loan to a company or the government where they will pay you back at a later date with interest. So there's there could be a possibility of losing money here, but it's not going to be as risky as stocks are. Bonds also come with a time restriction. The bond must mature or age for its full time frame, or else when you take the money back, it will not be as nearly as much as it could be. So just be cognizant of that as well. There are also penalties associated with it for withdrawing or taking out any money in this kind of concept, too early. And then there's mutual funds and index funds. These are going to be another form of an investment that takes some responsibility off of your plate. So for these types of investments, you're essentially buying a large group of investments and employing a manager to invest that money into a number of different assets. As always, there's risk that your investments may decrease in value and you could lose money, but mutual and index funds are generally going to be a less risky investment than your standard bond or stock purchase. So keep that in mind. All right, and then some large purchases do build value over time and become an asset that maybe you can pass on to your family members or maybe friends. So when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, purchasing a house or a vehicle or creating maybe a business and different kind of business, these are going to be long-term investments that you can build over time or will build value over time. A house, like as we see here, a house bought in Oregon in early 1992 for $70,000 could be worth around $337,000 as of 2021. Considering the average appreciation rate of homes in that area, that's a 384% increase in value, which is huge. In Pennsylvania, for $72,000 in 1992, you would be looking at something closer to $185,000 by 2021, which is closer to a 184% increase, which is still rather large nonetheless. So it depends on your area, but a home is definitely an investment that you can pass down to family to come. And homes tend to always appreciate in value, as we've seen in the last few years at least too. All right, and that takes us to our next topic. So far we've discussed 4 out of our 5 concepts. So budgeting, spending, saving, and investing. So these 4 concepts work in tandem with each other. So watching your spending can affect how much you save, which can allow you more room for your budget. And then once you're ready, you can invest any leftover money so you can help yourself down the road. Our last concept is one you may be able to guess, and that's credit. So credit is mostly related to budgeting and spending, but it's an extremely important factor when it comes to managing your financial health. Many people find it intimidating or confusing, but once you see how it works, it does make more sense. So later on this week, you could view an entire session on credit and credit cards, and I do recommend you tune in at that point. So for now, let's just talk about the basics of credit regarding your financial health. So to clear the air, credit is going to be a measure of how well you can pay off and then manage your debt within a certain time frame. But what is debt? So debt is any money that you owe, whether to a company, the government, a friend, you get the point. So if you owe money, you have debt. Credit is your score based on how well you pay off and then manage the debt. So the catch here is that credit also takes into account how long it takes or how long you take to pay it back, depending on what the agreement is or the payment plan between you and the creditor. So let's say Bobby and Maggie have a payment plan of $5 a month to pay off $50 in debt. So Bobby pays their $5 each month and pays it off the $50 in total. Maggie, on the other hand, misses a few monthly payments, but still manages to complete the $50 debt. In the end, Bobby will have a much higher credit score than Maggie because they upheld the plan and paid off the debt in a timely manner. So just to say it again and to make sure we're clear, credit is a measure of how well you pay off and then manage your debts within a certain time frame. So why would this be confusing and intimidating, which oftentimes it's viewed that way? The answer is that we often don't know when we're affecting our credit in the first place. So once you've established credit, all of your financial choices will then impact your credit. So credit is always around whether we realize it or not. Many times we won't even know that our credit has already been established, which affects us down the line as well as affects the purchases that we are going to make in the future. So not to mention, if we fall on hard times and cannot pay off a credit card, it can easily snowball and become much more difficult to catch up to. Credit cards are, definitely consistent with that. So are you unsure of when your credit was established? Establishing credit basically means when you started using credit. So in the chat, let us know how old you were when you first established credit. So some have done it as teenagers, others wait until they're, preparing to buy a house or another large loan, potentially student loans. So whether you knew it or not is a different story ultimately. All right, so to establish credit, you do have a few options. So applying for a credit card or a loan are going to be the most common ways. So if you were to apply for a store-specific card for a department store or a wholesale club, that will establish credit for you. If you're hoping to establish safely, you can apply for a secured credit card. These often have a prepaid limit to help you get started. So it's a very starter-based credit card. A credit builder loan or a secured loan is going to be another option commonly offered by credit unions and community banks as well. You can also gain a cosigner for a loan or become an authorized user on another account. These options usually involve getting someone you trust, like your parents or a very close friend, to essentially vouch for you to obtain the credit card or the loan that you're applying for. So one thing to say is do watch out for department store cards or the wholesale club cards and service specific credit cards. These store-based credit cards will establish credit, and for someone who may not understand what they're doing, could set themselves up for disaster down the road. So just keep that in mind. That said, these cards are a bit easier to acquire than regular credit cards, but they're often going to come with higher interest rates, which is ultimately where the creditors make their money. All right, so once your credit is established, you'll eventually have a score. So this meter is one I'm sure many of us have seen here or there and potentially dreaded, but keep in mind your own personal score and see where it falls in this range here. So scores that range from 300 to 580 are going to be considered poor scores. 580 to 669, fair. 670 to 739, good. 740 to 799, very good. And then 799 and above will be considered excellent. Now, you actually might see some discrepancies on the range if you were to look it up online, but in general, this is a good guide. So take note that your score is going to fluctuate daily for the most part, so it's a good idea to keep track of it when you can. Unfortunately, there isn't an easy way to know your exact FICO score or your exact credit score. What you can find, however, is it's called a FACO score. So it's an estimate of your credit score. So websites like Credit Karma and Experian, they'll show you a FACO score, and it'll give you an idea, a good temperature check of where you stand. And as we've mentioned before, credit has to deal with your debts. So you're allowed one free credit report from the credit bureaus each year. The thing with this is it doesn't include a score, but it rather shows you all the debts that you have and have accrued. So it's a good way to spot potential fraud. So definitely recommended once a year you have a free annual credit report. So definitely take a look when you can. All right, so remember, we have all different financial situations and scenarios and life scenarios. So the nice part about credit is that if you're not too far into credit card debt, you can still manage to raise your credit score for more opportunities later on. So on the other hand, credit card debt is also one of the most difficult types of debt to get out of. So always keep your eye on these debts. The best thing to do is to maintain good credit and to consistently pay your credit card bills on time and just keep a low balance as much as possible. There are a ton of other factors as well, but ultimately just holding yourself accountable and paying your bills off consistently on time is going to be a huge help in its own right. So if you'd like more information on credit and credit cards, you'll be able to join our session later on this week as we'll dive into the deeper intricacies of credit. So definitely stay tuned for that. All right, and that just about covers it all. So we've covered budgeting, spending, saving, investing, and now credit. So these 5 concepts are the basics of general financial health. So if you have a solid understanding of these concepts and can navigate them, then you'll be able to nurture your financial health, which is key. So let's do a quick recap on our concepts, and I challenge you to post in the chat your answers to a few questions as I pose them. So first we have budgeting again. So essentially creating a map of your money and where your money goes. So when you plan a budget, what's your preferred time span? Let us know in the chat and tell us if you prefer budgeting by month, week, or by the day even. Or maybe you've got all summer planned out for now. So we all work on different systems. So all are well, right? All is well, as long as you're budgeting in nature, right? So budgeting is the opening hand in the game of finance. So creating a budget allows you to see where your money is going and how much you're spending where. It also can be the amount of money you have for a potential purchase in the future. So remember that laptop, maybe you want to keep your budget under $500. It's really all up to you, but it's good to have options. And next was spending. So this one was easy. It's whatever you're buying. So here's a thought. What category would you consider to be your biggest spend? Do you mostly spend on groceries or takeout? Perhaps you're a streamer and constantly buying new electronics to upgrade your setup. Maybe you're an adventurer and spend mostly on travel. So post in the chat what spending category you think you spend the most in. I, for one, always eat out. So that would be my downfall. You can learn your spending habits by looking at your budget, and depending on how we spend, we can adjust to create more room for saving and then investing potentially. So, what we should keep in mind, however, is not what we need, but what we want, right? Or first what we want. So you can make a simple list of both to figure out, where you can lower your spending. Remember, your needs are anything that you need to live and function as a human being. So your rent, your groceries, your auto payment for your car, so you can, actually drive to work, your daycare tuition, so you can work at ease, knowing that your children socialize and are in good hands. That morning cup of coffee, you get the idea. So wants are things that you don't need to survive and function. So a new smartwatch armband, a third pair of sneakers in a new colorway, that new DLC skin pack for your video game. They're nice, but again, they're not essential for living every day, right? And with all the money you won't spend on the cheesecake from your local pizza shop, you'll be able to save, which brings us to our next concept. So saving is setting money aside, or any money, to be used at a later time. And that goes for a day later or 40 days later. So your saving habits also build into your future purchases, as it almost becomes a budget down the road. What is something that you're saving for? Starting the emergency fund, hoping to get some concert tickets. Are you finally going on that road trip to visit all the diners, drive-ins, and dives in the Midwest? We all have dreams, right? So when you begin to build your savings, your first thing should be the emergency fund. So emergencies and accidents are real things, and you almost don't believe it until it actually happens. So you usually don't see any of that coming. That's just the reality of the situation. Car accidents, pet emergencies, natural disasters, robberies, decline in mental health injury, COVID even, right? So you may never know if you never know when it actually is going to happen. So it's best to be prepared if possible, and it starts with an emergency fund. And remember that your emergency savings is recommended to be anywhere from 3 to 6 months of your monthly living expenses. A general savings goal is going to be to save 10% of your income each year. It can be difficult for some of us, so do what you can when you can. If you are working an hourly service job, perhaps you have the option to save your tips and live off your deposited paycheck. And as we've said many times, everyone's situation obviously is a little bit different. So building that emergency fund can be difficult, but you should save money now so you can save yourself later. That's the point we're trying to make here. And then speaking of saving for later, our fourth concept was investing. So similar to saving, investing is setting your money aside to hopefully grow over time. Then once it's taken out, it is again, hopefully much more than when you first placed it in. That's the goal. Investing is definitely something that takes time, so we can't rush into it too hard or too quickly, right? We want to have a good concept that we can move forward with. So are you currently investing in anything? If so, let us know in the chat, or let us know what age you started investing. A reminder that investments include stocks, bonds, mutual funds, index funds, even housing and real estate, right? They're very big investments. A more important reminder is that some investments can hold a lot of risk. The higher the risk, the higher the payout, and the bigger chance for you to lose money ultimately. So just be careful when you invest. And what is a more dreadful long game than credit? Our last concept is credit, and it is a sneaky one for a lot of the time. So if you recall, credit is a measure of how well you pay off and manage your debts within a certain time frame. So remember that credit is directly affected by your ability to budget. Your credit is also an influential part of being approved on applications and receiving loans in the future. So once credit has been established, you are forever affecting it as you continue to make financial decisions down the road. In the chat, tell us, how old do you think you were when you first established credit? Was it from a credit card application, when you got your first car loan, maybe a student loan, or perhaps you accidentally opened up a department store card for 50% off your order? That's how they get you ultimately. So keep your credit in check by finding out what your FICO score is through websites, again, like Credit Karma and MyFICO. Most importantly, just consistently pay off your credit bills on time, as simple as that sounds, right? All right. Cool. All right, so we've covered these 5 concepts. So what do we do now? So we'll take a look at ourselves and make sure we've got a decent budget and are set up for success for whatever financial situations and life situations we're in. So between our different backgrounds, salaries, wages, types of employment, again, everyone's a little bit different, right? So here's a suggestion. Create a personal goal regarding your finances. Something simple is fine. Determine your current budget using your income and expenses. Create a needs and wants list based on your spending habits, or decide how much money you're going to save, let's say in the next 6 months. So hopefully you've realized that some things or some of these things do take time. A lot of it is depending on what we're working with or what you're working with. So some shorter goals may be a few days or weeks, others a couple years. But let's do one example together as a group. So here's the example. So Jordan has just moved into Philadelphia, finally getting away from their parents. They currently have an hourly job as a shift manager, and they definitely put the time in, let's say 38 hours a week. Jordan has realized that they could save on public transportation and rideshare fees by getting a bike. They also realize that Philadelphia is brimming with a great food scene and want to try out the food scene. So they decide to do a needs and a wants chart and figure out where they can begin saving. So we've done some work here for you, but notice that the common living expenses and those daily needs are in the needs column. Any fancy fun items are in the wants. So Jordan realized they can probably cut back on any hobby purchases and maybe get away with reducing the cost of groceries. After all, they realized there was spoiled milk in the fridge, 5 cans of red kidney beans in the cupboard, and their coworker reminded them the joy of good frozen food. So Jordan's calculations reveal that if they don't take public transportation or ride shares to and from work, they can effectively save about $60 each month. And those $60 would be perfect for going out to one of Philly's up and coming restaurants for a good meal. The next step is planning what to save. If Jordan put aside $50 towards the following 3 paychecks, they can afford a used bike. It's a tough decision, but cutting back on a few groceries and holding off on an apartment furnishings, things like that, will lead Jordan to having more money in the long run. And that's the goal. So, well, 3 goals if you think about it. Goal 1, find out where we can save. Goal 2, save for a used bike so that we don't have to pay for public transportation. And goal 3, put aside $50 a paycheck until we can purchase a used bike. So completing any financial goal, will take time. You never know when something trivial or random will throw a wrench into your plans as well. So maybe having a haircut for the wedding that you forgot about is taking place next week. There goes 50 to 100 or $200 depending on what you actually need. Always be prepared to need extra time to generate your funds, or make your overall goal a little bit larger so you'll have some of a financial cushion. While it is easier said than done, do your best to stick to your goal, stick to your plan. And that covers it. We've discussed our 5 key concepts and even created some goals around that. We also took some time to give a few examples and a few examples of good saving mindsets. So with the time left, we'd love to answer any questions that you may have regarding the basics of financial health. Before we do that, again, just a quick disclaimer. We're not financial advisors. The content in this training is, again, for educational purposes only. So this material does not take into account your particular financial objectives, situations, or needs. And it's not intended as recommendations appropriate to your specific situation. So in order to make the best financial decision that does fit your needs, you should conduct your own research and then seek the advice of a licensed financial advisor if necessary. Again, with that in mind, let's jump into some questions that we received. And feel free to add questions as we move along. All right. All right, so we are light on questions. But if the questions come in, we have your information. So that will be something that we could follow up on. So feel free to throw those in the chat or the Q&A feature, and we'll get to them. So we have your email, so we can email you the answers to any questions you need. But this is the very beginning of Financial Literacy Week, powered by UMortgage. We thank you greatly for participating and watching and tuning in for today's session. There's also another session at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on budgeting, and you'll get more notifications throughout the week of all the other courses as well. It's definitely it's a great situation that we're putting ourselves in. There's a ton of free content, so definitely recommend it to tune in throughout the week. With that being said, I thank everyone for tuning into the very beginning of Financial Literacy Week, the basics of financial health. I wish you all the best, and I will see some of you towards the end of the week. I will be doing a cryptocurrency course, so tune in for that. But tune into everything. I appreciate everyone tuning in. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Take care, everyone.
The recording has stopped.